evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and as a return guest, we have with us this evening Dr. André Morgan, the Beverly School District's Director of Opportunity, Equality, and Access. Got it backwards. Access is in the middle, but yeah, you're still covering all of them. Welcome, André.
How are you, George? And many thanks for inviting me back to the table for conversation. Certainly appreciate you for that.
Well, as if you've been following the show, we did the previous one. We had some good discussion going and unfortunately ran out of time. So we need to continue on from about there. And I guess, André, you were starting to talk about the issue of not leaving kids behind. And what does that really entail in Beverly?
And so, a starting point for us has been the design and forthcoming implementation of an equity audit. So once, shortly after I came on board, I got committed to partnering with Beverly's superintendent, Dr. Suzanne Shirochik, on developing an equity audit report for the district. Now, the idea, George, behind the equity audit report is to assess the current strengths and challenges regarding equity for Beverly Public Schools and really chart a course of improvement for the identified challenges moving forward. And so we've just finished up a draft of the report. The report outlines, or the report was compiled from, both quantitative and qualitative sources, both of which were really key for us in building an understanding of how well the district is doing in meeting its goals of opportunity, access, and equity. And in turn, we find that the audit can and will shed light on where we can focus our efforts to mobilize support for each and every student's individual needs.
Well, where do you think the report is going to show things right now? Preliminary guess from what you've looked at the data.
Well, we looked at 10 specific areas. And so in each of those areas, it outlined both opportunities and challenges. And so the areas we looked at included how we accept and or marginalize student identity and voice. 2, alignment with definitions of equity. 3, English language, arts, and mathematics achievement, particularly at the middle school level. 4, over and under racial representation, advanced placement course enrollment. And this is on the high school level. The next area we looked at is English language learners, enrollment in advanced placement courses. Again, that's at the high school level. We looked at the students that we serve that are economically disadvantaged, and this is district-wide. We further looked at over under racial representation in school suspension rates, again, district-wide. We looked at over under racial representation in special education, also district-wide. Examined school culture and climate, and then staff diversity and recruitment.
So from all those issues that you looked at, what's the most important one, or what's the one that's on your top of the list to attack right now?
And so we're integrating, I guess the direct answer is there's no one issue that's more important than the other, but what we're taking is an introspective approach, meaning that the recommendations that we made for each of these 10 areas after the findings will be integrated into the district's improvement plan. And so that work will start this week.
So give me a for instance of what do you mean by an improvement plan, or pick one of these areas, and can you give me a little more specific about exactly what you found and what are you going to do about it? What's the district going to do about it?
Sounds good. And so I'm going to look at staff diversity and recruitment, which was one of our areas. And I'm going to pick that particular area because our school committee had also developed a resolution around that. And so, what we found was that across our district staff, that we have a small number of minoritized staff of all levels working in the district. This includes 5 Black staff, 4 Asian staff, and 11 Latino staff. We also found that there was an opportunity for us to expand our recruiting methods in order to attract more diverse staff. In terms of recommendations and how we might move forward, we're going to be developing collaborations with minority serving nonprofit organizations and even higher education institutions, and building existing partnerships with organizations that support our existing recruiting efforts. Perhaps one of the things that came out of the findings, if you will, was how to be strategic in our approach to solving this. And so we understand that when you talk about recruiting staff, it's not just a matter of throwing out a posting somewhere, but recruiting has a direct correlation with retention. And so part of the discussion is, what does the district have in place, not only to attract diverse staff, but to retain them? What kind of support systems are available? So to that end, because we consider ourselves to be a district committed to innovation, we've taken the lead in establishing an affinity group for educators of color in the North Shore area. This is just one recommendation out of a few that we've come up with. The first meeting was actually held a couple of weeks ago at the beginning of March and included staff of color from 10 districts across the North Shore area. The idea behind this affinity group is to have a group that comes together, a group of educators of color, and it is really designed to be a support system for educators of color in the region. Now, why is that important? It's important because if there's no support system for your diverse staff will likely not stick around for the long term. And so as we talk about diverse staff, these are some of the things that we need to consider.
Well, for perspective, what's the total staff of the system, the district?
We have about 700.
So it's
staff-wise.
So it's 5, 4, 5, 9, and 8. I think is about out of 700. So it pretty much reflects the community, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. So okay. And the other thing I guess I'm more concerned about is you talk about opportunities, and what I'm seeing, and I've had 3 kids go through the system. I've had 3 grandkids graduate from Beverly High School. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there to improve the quality of and the diversity of what we're offering in courses. And that's some of the issue I think I would like to have a joint discussion with you and the assistant superintendent about curriculum. But you start to look at some of the issues relative to what's the workforce expecting of students that want to get hired into it. And it's both the case of students that are going to college and ones that, if they're lucky, they can get into a trade school or continue on in the community college levels. So I get back to the question I think I raised the last time of what's the purpose of a K-12 education in this current age of technology and automation and a very high dependence on a service industry. So how does the school system change to provide the opportunities?
Oh, absolutely. And great question. The school system is training change agents. We want for our students to be change agents in the world around them, not just to be good citizens, but we want them to be contributors. We want them to be leaders in every field of human endeavor. And so, I mentioned in our last discussion that, part of the opportunity we have as a district is we get to train students for careers and occupations that don't yet exist. And so on the cuff of moving with technologies, we want to make sure that we're on a progressive path with not only embracing technologies, but helping students to be able to be co-creators with technological advances, with being able to utilize them, with being able to think about how do you expand a particular platform or technology, how do you make it work, and how do you begin to apply it and think more expansively about it. And so how do you become the one that makes the change, not just for this community, but for society collectively? And so that's part of our goal. The goal of education used to be that you graduate students that had skill sets to be able to do a multitude of things. But I think with the broad expansion of technology and where our society is, we've got to train our students to do and develop our students to do a whole lot more.
Well, I think that one of the key issues, I think I mentioned when we had our little chit chat after the last show when we were off camera, is an experience that I've been involved with students who have graduated and then they're in the workforce, and the problems that they face are nothing like they've ever seen in school. And there gets to be this issue about schools really have to teach the students how to learn. And learning how to learn is not something very easy, because once you're out of school, you don't have somebody standing at the head of the classroom reciting to you what you need to know. So this is one of the issues, I think, of developing independence of the students so that they feel confident that, hey, I can tackle that job. And there's a kind of an obscene phrase that's used, but essentially it's go read the manual. Well, a student's prepared to read a manual and understand it and apply whatever they learn to the machine they're working on or the process they're trying to develop.
So we want our students to do more than just read the manual. We want them to be able to write the manual. And so that means that, not only are we teaching students how to learn, but we're teaching them how to be continuous learners, which means that, even when you've attained several degrees, you're still in the process where you're learning and you're co-creating and you're developing and you're innovating, because you're constantly pushing to excellence, across the spectrum. And so it's a little more for us than just teaching students how to learn. We want them to be continual learners. And then we want them to be able to take that learning and be able to apply it in their lives, regardless of the pathway that they choose.
Yeah, I know in my own experience, I graduated as a mechanical engineer, and I was into rocket science. Fine. I get a job working on the Apollo program, developing a fuel cell, which is all electrochemistry. Nothing like I ever saw in college or high school. And all of a sudden, you're an electrochemical engineer. Like, that's the job. And I think this kind of flexibility or surprise or diversity, whatever you want to call it, is even more pronounced in this day and age where things have changed so fast that I think the students are continually, like you say, learning to learn and then continuing to learn. It's a never-ending process. So I guess, how do you get that message off to a 14, 15, 16, 18-year-old student?
Well, I think you do it through a number of ways. I don't think there's one particular way. But for example, you can do it through personalized learning approaches. You can do it through project-based learning, which is an element that our district, two elements that our district are fully supportive of. You can do it through innovative instructional strategies, which is key to inspiring learning. What goes on in the classroom, how a teacher presents content, how a teacher fosters and draws out that content. And so, there's a number of mechanisms that we employ to really kind of spur that learning. But then another piece of that is, how do we tap into a student's social emotional needs as well, which we also believe is an inherent part of getting students engaged in their learning process.
Well, I think the other issue that comes up is we've gone through, or at least you guys have gone through, a year, probably a year and a half by the time we finish, of remote learning. And there's going to have to be a recovery program from that once you get the students back in class, hopefully in September. And at the same time, the process of educating students who've had that kind of experience is going to be different. And how does the school system tap into that capability of, I think what you're talking about is individualized learning, And at the same time, the structure of the classroom, the camaraderie, the friendships, the relationships, and the emotional issues of being in a classroom with other students, working on a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of those elements are important. We know that the human touch is going to be important, the understanding of how to work collaboratively, the understanding of how to think critically, how to think rationally. All these things are a part of an equation, and what we're striving for in terms of making sure that our students are well embedded and well positioned to be able to maneuver, in the future.
Yeah.
Or at least beyond their time in the Beverly Public School System.
Yeah, so I guess the issues keep coming up as being more complex as we go along, and you got to be very flexible. And I think that's one of the issues of diversity. Can you bring in people who are flexible and not already on a very narrow path that they have no more ability to change? So part of the problem is keeping the teachers up to speed with what's going on and being able to present new information and new ways to present it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the approach, is the support that we give all of our staff, even from a social emotional lens. And so while I talked about it from a student angle, it's also important that we offer that to our staff as well. And so I want to get back to an earlier point, because I talked about retention is a means of our staff recruiting process. And retention, goes across the board. It's our diverse staff. It's not just our diverse staff, but it's all of our staff collectively. And so, one of the comments or responses to my earlier comment that you made was about our staff being reflective of the community. I think one of the things that we've learned is that this community is evolving and it's changing. And so it's important that the changing demographics of the area are also reflected in the school system as well, which is what our school committee has desired by virtue of the resolution that they posed. And so, as we look at retention mechanisms, if you will, we're looking across the board. But, we're also putting a more diverse lens on it as well.
Well, I think one of the things that we've had several discussions on what's happening about what's going on in the city, and there seems to be a motivation, even comes out of Boston, to provide lots of condos and apartments close to the railroad stations to attract the people in Boston, what I call the Boston expats. They can't afford to live there, but they can afford to live here. And I think that brings in a different diversity or a different extent of diversity than what I think you've been talking about. So how does that factor into your thinking?
Well, as we talk about diversity, certainly, issues of housing and salary come into play as well. And those are important factors for any member of the education sector. And so, part of the equity audit was to really raise some of the issues or some of the barriers, if you will, to what's been a problem or what's been an issue for us in some way, shape, or form. And so while it raises some accomplishments in our district, it also raises some areas where we can move into continuous improvement. So to your question, what does it mean for us? It means that we've got to think creatively, we've got to think strategically. And if this is something that we're going to be doing, then we have to consider all of the elements that would make that happen.
Well, I think
and that's not an easy solution.
No, and I think one of the things that pops in my mind is back when the elections were coming up, we had interviews with several candidates. And I remember one of the candidates mentioning that when she graduated from teacher school, teacher's college, She couldn't afford to live in Beverly, so she had to find a roommate so they could share an apartment. And I think this is one of the issues that the city is going to face, is that the salaries that teachers are making now are as such that they can't live locally. And so you're almost to the situation of having to import people from a lower rented area. So,
well, the great news around that is that the city has taken a position of implementing a couple of measures to look at that and help address it. So for example, there's a race and equity task force that I have the joy of being a part of, which is run by the city, and the city has also recently hired a director of equity, if you will, who's looking at those issues as well. And so I think with more attention and awareness around these specific issues, it brings us a little closer to having a solution and being able to address it so that we can achieve the overall mission, if you will.
So what does this director of equity do different than what you're doing?
Well, my focus is on the school district.
Yeah, aside from that, but is he doing the same thing in the city that you're doing in the school district?
Well, I think there are a few distinct differences. And so whereas my focal area is more academic, the new director of equity's responsibility, focuses on kind of like the collective equity approach to the city, community engagement, issues of housing, issues of the resources that people make, for lack of a better term. And while I don't, have the exact job description committed, if you will, while the area does have some overlap, there are some distinctions between the two roles.
I think when you start to talk about the diversity issue, there's got to be an overlap between them, because the students that come in from whatever you would describe as the minority group also have parents that are probably belong to that same minority group. And one of the issues that comes up, as you mentioned earlier, is English as a second language, or being proficient in English. And we had a discussion with one gentleman one time. They were talking about Lynn, that they had 60 different languages in the school system. And I guess the issue of how do you get students proficient enough in English to get some achievement or some success out of an education system, and at the same time, it's a common problem for their parents too, that if the kids can't speak English, the parents probably can't either, or they're not proficient in it. And there gets to be an issue of how do you get everybody up to speed in the local language?
And so I think it takes a multi-tiered approach. Part of our theory of action, particularly around, working with our English language learners, is that if we as a district address the existing communication gaps between the school and English language parents, and if we're really intentional about the modes by which we inform parents about their student schooling and any services the school provides in the languages that parents understand, then we'll significantly increase the engagement of our English language students and their families, and see that engagement reflected in greater attendance rates, reduced dropout rates, greater participation in school activities and events, higher participation in advanced placement coursework, and higher graduation rates. And so we have a English language education team that's already in place that's working on a number of things to help us move towards that theory of action.
Is this team, well, I'm getting to, I guess, is this team linked in with the city for the parents?
Well, linked in from a perspective of working with the parents of our students, yes. If you're talking about a separate entity where we're just working with the community who may or may not have students involved in the public school system. That's not where our core emphasis is right now. And so we're really focused on our English language learning students and how we can really serve their needs most effectively so that they can move down a pathway that's not only most appropriate, but that's most beneficial. And this is part of that statement that I made in my last interview that we don't want to leave any student behind. And so regardless of the student background or ethnicity, we want to make sure that we provide the necessary support systems academically and social, emotional oriented too, that helps every student to be successful.
Well, I'm thinking back to the old days when immigrants came to this country and didn't speak English, and they ended up in the low rent district, and they had community houses that were locations where the parents and the children together could learn the language. And I guess what I'm trying to get to is, does the city have any opportunity to integrate with the school system to come up with a after-hours course for parents to learn what the kids are learning?
Well, I think in a nutshell, there could be a number of opportunities to do that. I can't really speak to what the city is doing explicitly for those persons who aren't a part of the district. But I know we are working on some partnerships and collaborations that would help the training and development of language skills, particularly for those where English isn't a primary language.
Oh, essentially what I'm getting down to is the good old-fashioned night school for the parents to catch up to what the kids are doing.
Yeah, and we certainly think that that's important, and important from a perspective that it gives the entire family the baseline and the flexibility to be successful in a number of ways.
Yeah, and lo and behold, we've had another half hour of fun.
Yeah, and we're having such a great conversation.
Yeah, and we're getting there. So I think probably we need to have some more discussions, and because this is a never-ending problem, and I don't see any instant solutions. And it's going to be something we have to work on and express what the hell's going on in this city. And the school district is a major part of that. There's no doubt about it.
But you know the exciting thing, George, is that we get to reimagine how we do things. And I think that that's been one of the bright spots in the pandemic and in the remote learning process, to be able to rethink how we're disseminating education and how we're helping our students to learn and how we're supporting them to move to the next stages in their lives.
Yeah, and I think I would like to have another show, joint show with you and the assistant superintendent to get into some of these opportunities for all students that are not necessarily diversity issues at all, but something that the opportunity needs to be there. The students need to have access. And I think that applies to everybody, regardless of what their background is. So,
oh, absolutely. We welcome the opportunity.
So if you'd speak to her on my behalf, I would appreciate it.
Most certainly.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for watching with us. We're having more fun than real people, and hope you join us on the next one.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.